My 14-year-old son beat up his father's new wife at their wedding until she lost her mind, and I couldn't be prouder of him. The call came from my commander. Your son has committed a criminal assault at his father's wedding. You need to come home right now. I was stationed at a base in Germany and hadn't seen my boys in 8 months. My teenage son, who'd always hated hurting people, was now being accused of viciously attacking a woman outside the hotel. After an exhausting 18-hour flight, I arrived at my ex-husband's house, where my son was. The woman's blood was still stained on the carpet, a deep black stain. I rang the doorbell. My ex-husband, Ethan, answered, his face twisted with anger. We're filing a complaint, he snarled. I won't take sides until I see both of them, I said, shoving past him. The living room felt like a courtroom. Ethan's parents were seated on the sofa, his brother, Gregory, lingered near the fireplace, his sister, Camila, stood in a corner, and the bride's parents loomed like guard dogs. In the middle of it all was Vanessa, the new wife, her face bruised and swollen, bandages covering her injuries. She was crying, trying to dry her eyes with the infusion. And there, amidst this chaos, was my son. My 14-year-old boy, who couldn't even bring himself to kill insects because he didn't want to hurt anything, was sitting upright, looking me directly in the eye. Not a hint of regret on his face. In fact, he looked proud of what he'd done. You've destroyed our family. Ethan spat. Look what he did to Vanessa's face. Vanessa was crying into the trash can. They're treating him like an adult, aren't they? Grandpa muttered, disgust clear on his face. I turned to look at my son. His joints were still swollen and bruised, but there was no real excuse for what had happened. I asked him to tell me his side of the story. He scanned the room slowly, taking in every face before he spoke. Do you want the truth? She's been harassing me for 6 months. The room went silent, and for a split second, my world stopped. But then the room erupted. Liar. Disgusting. How dare you? Vanessa's face twisted in anger. She couldn't even bear to look at him. You're making it all up. I was just in love with him, Vanessa's mother chimed in, sticking her finger at my son. Little villain. But Ethan stepped in, grabbing her arm, his pale face showing that he was ready for this confrontation. Amidst the madness, my son calmly pulled out his phone and slid it open to some hidden photos. She says 14-year-old boys always steal. Vanessa started to protest. She says I should be grateful for it. I glanced over my son's shoulder and saw the photos. My stomach twisted. Ethan's hands were shaking as he tried to focus on the screen. It could have been anyone, Ethan muttered, his voice hoarse, almost as though he was reciting lines he didn't believe. Vanessa lunged to take the phone from him. They're out of context. I was just. She stopped, realizing she'd just admitted the photos were real. My son stood up, his voice shaking with anger. Dad, I told you 3 months ago. You said she was just affectionate, Ethan began to babble, trying to defend her. I thought to myself, I knew it. Grandpa, shaking his head, muttered, I would have loved to have had this problem when I was 14. His face turned from red to pale as he glanced from Vanessa to his son. Something inside him seemed to break as the weight of the situation hit him. Aunt Camila, my son said, his voice shaky. You told me not to make a scene. Oliver took a step back, tears streaming down his face. Oh my god. Oh my god, he murmured. I thought you were just Uncle Gregory. You told me I should be grateful. Gregory buried his head in his hands. Damn it. I was joking, he exclaimed, his voice filled with regret. I didn't know she actually was. Grandma. Impossible, she muttered. Boys can't be raped by women. Grandma collapsed onto the sofa, clutching her rosary beads, murmuring prayers under her breath. All of you told me to keep quiet about this. Vanessa's parents argued softly in the background. Her father whistled, clearly uncomfortable. Not yet. Amelia. You said she was better, he said, his voice trailing off. The word hung in the air, suspended between us. But that's not why I hit her, my son cut me off. Everyone froze. What do you mean, that's not why? I asked, my voice shaking. Last week, I caught her coming out of Lucas's room at 2 in the morning. Lucas? My heart stopped. He was 9 years old. Lucas was my ex-wife's son. That's when Vanessa's mask finally cracked. She looked at me with a sneer, as though she'd just realized her secret was out. Ethan grabbed her by the shoulders. What did you just say? His voice was hoarse, his fear now unmistakable. For the first time, he seemed genuinely terrified. My son was crying now, a single blood-red tear rolling down his cheek. The morning of your wedding, I begged you, he whispered. You didn't say anything today, I muttered, knowing that nothing I said would stop the chaos. So I decided to stop it in the only way I could. I gave him a look, and my son wiped away his tears before bolting upstairs. A moment later, he returned, carrying Lucas, who buried his face against my son's shoulder. Lucas, did Vanessa touch you? My son's voice cracked as he asked. Lucas didn't answer at first. He was just staring blankly, his small head buried in his brother's chest. Then, with a shaky voice, he said, she put on my pajama shorts, the blue ones, right inside my thighs. Vanessa's mother screamed at her, furious. You promised. You went to therapy. You said this would never happen again. Vanessa stood there, no more pretending, her face contorting with contempt. That's when my son spoke again, his voice clear and heavy with emotion. We're the kids here, and all the adults in this room, they preferred her over us. Without hesitation, I dialed 911. Vanessa's family begged me to hold off, offering to drop the charges if I kept quiet. But I wasn't listening. That's when Vanessa rushed to the bathroom. I had no idea what she was doing in there, but at that point, I didn't care. 10 minutes later, she emerged just as the police arrived at the door. They took her away. I grabbed my son and Lucas and headed straight to my best friend's house. But just 2 hours later, my phone rang. The detective's voice was serious. We need you down here at the station, now. I grabbed Raphael and we headed straight to the station, where they took me into an interrogation room. It turned out that what Vanessa had hidden on her phone in the bathroom was going to land me in some serious trouble. And that was just the beginning. I was about to find out that, as usual, the monsters had a backup plan. The detective led me through a narrow hallway that smelled of stale coffee and floor cleaner. He opened the door into a small, sterile room with nothing but a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. He dropped a paper file on the table in front of me. Take a look at this, he said. My hands were trembling as I opened the file. Inside, there were screenshots of text messages exchanged with Vanessa. One message had me telling her that she could take care of my son however she wanted while I was deployed. Another message showed me expressing full confidence in her judgment when it came to disciplining him. One of the messages said that teenagers needed firm boundaries, and that I was counting on Vanessa to set them. I stared at these messages, ones I had never sent. My mind couldn't process what I was looking at. The timestamps showed that they were sent 3 months ago, right around the time my son had first told Ethan what was going on. The detective sat across from me, closely watching my reaction. He explained that they had discovered these messages during their search of Vanessa's phone after her arrest. He directly asked me if I had ever authorized Vanessa to physically punish my son. Then, he asked if I had given her permission to have any sexual contact with him as a form of punishment. I immediately said, no, absolutely not, and insisted that I had never sent those messages. I demanded to see the phone records to prove I hadn't sent them. The detective told me they needed to keep my phone for a medical legal comparison and analysis. That's when I realized that I was no longer just a witness in this case. They were investigating me as a possible accomplice. I was taken to another room, where a technician photographed my hands from every angle. Then, they inked my fingers and pressed them onto fingerprint cards. The technician explained that they had to rule me out as being involved in the crimes. The word accomplice made my stomach churn. Vanessa was trying to manipulate me, making it seem like I knew about and approved of what she was doing. For the next 3 hours, I was bombarded with questions. They asked me about my relationship with Vanessa, when we met, how often we communicated, and what we talked about. They wanted to know if I was aware of what was happening with my son. Every question felt like a trap. They asked if I had ever discussed discipline with Vanessa. They asked if I had noticed any changes in my son's behavior. They even questioned why I hadn't come back sooner if I suspected something was wrong. Finally, they let me go, but they kept my phone and told me not to leave the city. I left the station feeling like the walls were closing in on me. I went straight to the office of Marcus Fielding, a lawyer my friend had recommended. Marcus looked me straight in the eye and immediately got to work. She had me sit in her office while she typed everything I said into her computer. I told her about the marriage, what my son had revealed, and now the false messages I had seen. Marcus quickly filed preservation orders with all the major phone carriers and social media companies. She explained that Vanessa had likely used spoofing apps or manipulated screenshots while she was in the bathroom that day. Marcus said we needed to obtain the real phone records to prove the messages were fabricated. She also filed requests for Vanessa's research history, hoping to find evidence that she had been searching for ways to falsify messages. Marcus warned me not to speak to the police without her present. She made it clear that Vanessa was trying to create doubt and confuse the situation for her own defense. The next morning, Samuel Grant from the National Child Safety Bureau came to my friend's house where we were staying. He needed to interview the boys separately as part of the official investigation. He was kind and gentle with them but meticulous in his questions. He asked my son to recount everything that had happened with Vanessa from the beginning. My son told him about the first time she entered his room at night. He described how she would wait for Ethan to fall asleep, and he talked about the threats she'd made if he told anyone. Samuel carefully wrote down everything and had my son sign each page. Then, he interviewed Lucas in another room. The little boy was scared, but he described the times Vanessa came to his room. Lucas showed Samuel the bruises still healing on his legs. Samuel photographed each bruise and made note of their size and color. Something was definitely wrong with Vanessa's visit to the bathroom that day. 10 minutes, that's a long time to sit in a bathroom while the police arrive. The reaction from Vanessa's mother, telling her daughter to make sure she followed through with therapy, made me wonder how many other children this woman had already harmed. A nurse was brought in to conduct a full physical examination on both boys. After the interviews, Samuel sat down with me to explain what would happen next. He set up a security plan for me to have supervised visits with my sons while the investigation continued. We would meet at the National Child Safety Bureau office in the presence of a social worker. It was humiliating to need supervision to see my own child, but I immediately agreed. Their safety was the only thing that mattered. Samuel explained that the criminal case against Vanessa would proceed, no matter what happened with the investigation into me. He told me the boys' testimonies were credible and matched the signs of abuse. The material evidence from Lucas's examination strengthened their case, but Samuel also warned me that Vanessa's lawyer would likely try to use the false messages to argue that I was involved, or at the very least, negligent. The next few days passed in a blur, everything moved quickly but painfully slowly at the same time. Marcus managed to get my phone records, proving that I had never sent those messages. The metadata showed that the messages had been created on Vanessa's phone using a third-party app. Victoria also discovered that Vanessa had searched online for how to fake SMS messages for the court, as well as how to create fake apps that looked real on her laptop. A week before the wedding, the police inspector called Victoria to tell him that he no longer considered me a suspect, but that I was still a crucial witness in the case. I was still in the parking lot when my phone rang, and the screen displayed a military number. It was Jacob Lancaster from Military Legal Services, letting me know that my security clearance was now under review because of the ongoing investigation. He told me my emergency leave had been extended, but that I'd been placed on administrative leave, meaning I couldn't return to duty until the situation was resolved. Sitting in my car, I felt like my entire career was about to collapse just when my children needed me the most. Moments later, Victoria called and told me that she had gotten copies of the false screenshots that Vanessa had shown to the police. She had examined them on her computer and immediately noticed that the formatting didn't match the model of my phone. The timestamps didn't align, and some of the messages had inconsistent spacing. She had already called Aubrey Wells, an expert in digital evidence tampering. Aubrey was on her way to her office to properly examine everything. During this time, Julian Pioneer from Victim Services called to tell me she'd arranged for Lucas to have a medical exam at the Maplewood Children's Clinic that afternoon. I went with him, but when we got to the exam room, they told me I had to wait in the hallway. Lucas looked so small as he went in with just the nurse and the doctor. I paced the hallway for 3 hours, checking my phone constantly, trying not to think about what they might find. The nurse brought him juice twice, and each time I saw him sitting on the examination table, wearing a hospital gown. When they finally finished, Lucas came out, clutching a teddy bear they had given him. He wouldn't look me in the eye. Julian came out with a thick folder of documents and told me that they had found evidence supporting what Lucas had said. As we were talking, my phone started vibrating with messages from Ethan. He was losing it because he couldn't see Lucas. The security plan now required that all visits be supervised, and he screamed at me in the voicemails, blaming me for everything. The first message accused me of turning our son against Vanessa. The second message labeled Vanessa a predator. The third blamed our son for ruining his marriage. The fourth blamed me for not warning him about Vanessa, even though I had literally been the one to bring her into the family. His parents called too, but I deleted their messages without listening. Vanessa paid a deposit the same day using her parents' money, and within hours, her lawyer had filed a restraining order against me. The papers stated that I had orchestrated everything to gain custody of Lucas and that I had coached my son to attack her. Vanessa portrayed herself as the victim of a jealous ex-wife's scheme. Victoria said this was typical behavior for a predator trying to turn the tables. The next morning, my son had an interview with Samuel Grant at the Beacon Family Services. My son sat in a small room, under the watch of cameras, and told everything in detail. He even recalled the exact dates when he had first talked to Ethan about the abuse, 3 months ago. He remembered the specific words his grandfather had used to laugh at him. He could recall what his aunt was wearing the day she told him not to overreact. He even remembered the TV show where his uncle had told him he should just be grateful. Derek carefully documented everything and created an official timeline of all the adults who had been informed and who had failed to act. The security plan that had been set up meant that my sons had to stay with my friend and could only visit me during approved hours. We settled into a strange routine. I would arrive at 7 a.m. to get them ready for school. I left when they got on the bus and returned at 3 p.m. when they got home. But then, I had to leave again at 8 p.m., which was the hardest part because that's when Lucas had his worst nightmares. My friend would text me, telling me that Lucas was crying for me, but I wasn't allowed to return before morning. We lived like this for weeks, waiting for court dates and the outcome of the investigation. Then, I received an email from Lucas's school counselor that made me sick. She had gone through his school records for the past year and noticed significant changes over the last 6 months, right when Vanessa had moved in. His grades had dropped from A's to C's, and he went from never missing school to having 12 absences. His teacher had noticed he had become withdrawn and had stopped participating in class. Another teacher wrote that Lucas had started falling asleep in the classroom. The counselor had even called Ethan about it, but he dismissed it, saying Lucas was just adjusting to his new stepmother. All these signs of distress had been documented and ignored while this monster was abusing him. Marcus passed on another update when the detective called her to tell her they had found a voice memo on Vanessa's phone. In it, Vanessa threatened to ruin Ethan's life if he married her. The detective sent it for analysis, but he warned it seemed quite convincing. Marcus immediately demanded the original file, not just a copy, so Nathaniel could properly examine it. Nathaniel began working on the audio file as soon as he got to Marcus's office. He extracted the metadata first and discovered that the file had been created only 2 days before the wedding. The waveforms showed strange inconsistencies, with the background noise changing suddenly. He isolated different parts of the audio and found evidence of words being cut from various sources and stitched together. The modulation patterns didn't match natural speech, and there were digital artifacts indicating AI manipulation. Nathaniel said he could prove in court that this audio was a patchwork of at least 3 different recordings, altered using AI voice tools. Marcus immediately submitted the evidence to the court and began the process of obtaining Vanessa's phone records. She explained that getting the call logs and metadata would take at least 3 weeks. Each day of waiting felt like a month. I couldn't sleep, knowing that Vanessa was out there spreading lies about me. Marcus kept reminding me that building a solid case took time, but I was losing my mind watching my life fall apart. 2 days into the wait, Marcus forwarded me a confidential email from Vanessa's father. He admitted that Vanessa had had an incident with a neighbor's child 5 years ago. The family had moved away after that, and he wanted immunity before he provided more details. Marcus explained that we'd need approval from the prosecutor for any immunity agreement, which could take weeks. The hearing related to the restraining order was first, and I thought that would finally give us some protection. Marcus made it clear that I had never threatened Vanessa and that I was only defending my son from abuse. The judge barely glanced at our evidence before issuing mutual orders to ban contact. He said that, given the serious allegations from both sides, he had to be cautious. I wanted to scream that being cautious meant protecting the children, not their abuser. Meanwhile, Lucas was undergoing his medical exam at the children's hospital. The doctor found evidence that matched the abuse, but his language was so cautious it made me sick. He used terms like suggestive of trauma and wounds consistent with the reported mechanism, instead of just saying what we all knew to be true. The report helped support our case, but I got the feeling no one wanted to say the exact words out loud. Then, Marcus got a call from a police officer who had reviewed the wedding body camera footage. He'd found an audio recording of Vanessa talking to her mother after my son hit her. In the recording, Vanessa can be heard saying, "These photos shouldn't matter," before her mother tells her to be quiet. Marcus immediately requested a copy and submitted it as evidence for both cases. She explained that her strategy was to protect me from false accusations while keeping the assault case separate from my son's testimony. Having 2 separate legal paths meant more work and more costs, but we had no choice. Marcus warned me it would be expensive and exhausting, but I had already spent $8,000, and we were just getting started. That same week, I received an official notification from my military command. My security clearance was suspended while the investigation continued. Even if I were completely innocent, this suspension meant any chance of promotion was gone. 15 years of service destroyed by a lying predator. My commander personally called to tell me he believed me, but his hands were tied. Protocol required a suspension for any accusations involving minors, regardless of the evidence. I had gone from soldier training in Germany to living as an unemployed person in my friend's living room. Meanwhile, Corey had finished his full analysis of the false voice memo. Vanessa's father suddenly had information about an old incident with a neighbor's child but insisted on immunity before he would provide any further details. The timing of this was incredibly convenient. Why hadn't he mentioned it when his daughter was first arrested? Now, he was finding evidence that the recordings had been made by splicing together at least 3 different sources. The digital artifacts clearly pointed to voice generation software by AI. The creation date in the metadata of the file was just 2 days after Vanessa claimed I had left the message. Corey wrote up a detailed technical report that, according to Marcus, would destroy their case in court. But the courts moved slowly, and every day that passed was another day my children had to suffer. Child Protection Services began their evaluation of Lucas's placement, as Ethan's parents had minimized the abuse. The social worker questioned the family members to see if any relatives could provide a safe home for Lucas. She mentioned that they could consider placing him in a foster home if no family options were available. The idea of Lucas living with strangers made me physically ill. Ethan's sister called, saying she would take Lucas, but only if I admitted I was lying. Her brother said the same thing. They all wanted me to admit I had made up the entire story before they'd help me. The social worker said their conditional offers showed they weren't suitable placements. She began to investigate Ethan's extended family, but most of them lived out of state. 3 weeks into this nightmare, Ethan showed up at my friend's house to take Lucas. Emily saw him coming and immediately called the police while locking the doors. I grabbed my phone and started recording from the living room window. Ethan was pounding on the door, screaming that Lucas was his son. He argued that the security plan was illegal and that he had parental rights. Lucas was hiding in the closet, crying, and my son was trying to comfort him. The police arrived in 10 minutes, but Ethan had already kicked the door hard enough to break the frame. They let him go, stating that without a restraining order, they couldn't arrest him. Emily had to pay for a new door and install security cameras that same day. Marcus filed emergency paperwork for a protection order, but the judge didn't want to hear it for another week. Every evening, we heard cars slow down outside, and we wondered if it was Ethan coming back. Lucas started wetting the bed and having nightmares where Vanessa was coming to get him. My son stopped eating properly and lost 5 kilos in 3 weeks. Stress was tearing both of them apart while the judicial system moved at a snail's pace. Marcus kept saying we were building a strong case, but I could see my children falling apart. Then, the phone calls finally came in, showing that Vanessa had never received a call from my number. But her lawyer made it clear that this didn't prove anything, since I could have used another phone. 2 days later, the prosecutor called a meeting at the court, where he outlined my son's options while Marcus sat next to us taking notes. He slid papers across the table, explaining that assault charges could result in detention for minors, but also mentioned something called a dejudicialization program. Marcus leaned forward and began discussing alternative counseling options while my son sat there, silent and pale. The prosecutor kept checking his watch as if he had somewhere else to be. Marcus insisted on therapy instead of formal charges. After 40 minutes of discussion, they agreed to consider my son making a written statement about everything that had happened. That night, my son sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours, writing page after page about what Vanessa had done to him. His hand clenched twice, and he had to stop to shake it out. I made him hot chocolate, but he didn't touch it. When he finally finished, he had written 12 full pages, describing everything she had done. He wrote about how she'd come into his room at night and touched him while he pretended to be asleep. He wrote about the photos she'd taken of him and how she told him that no one would believe him. He wrote about how he had surprised her with Lucas, and how he knew that getting married was his only chance to stop her. Reading what he had written made me vomit twice in the bathroom while he slept on the couch. The next morning, we took Lucas to the Beacon Family Services for his interview. From the outside, the building looked like an ordinary house, with toys in the waiting room and bright, colorful paintings on the walls. They brought Lucas into a special room with cameras while I sat in the hallway, watching other parents fix their phones. The interviewer was specially trained to speak with children about abuse in a way that didn't further harm them. I could hear Lucas crying through the door, even though he had told them she had only insinuated things. After 2 hours, they brought him out, and he wouldn't even look at me. The interviewer pulled Marcus aside and showed him the preliminary report on her tablet. The report showed that the abuse had started 6 months ago with small violations of boundaries, which escalated each week. Vanessa had told Lucas that it was their secret, and that bad things would happen if he told anyone. The report also noted signs of concussion, stages of healing, and behavioral changes that Lucas's teachers had observed. Marcus said that this report alone would significantly strengthen our criminal case. Later that afternoon, the detective called me into his office and warned me not to talk to Ethan's family. He said that any coordination between witnesses could look like collusion, even if we were just confirming facts with each other. Marcus told me that all communication should go through his office from now on to avoid any appearance of interference. She gave me a special messaging account to use for case-related messages, which she could monitor. 2 days later, Marcus got a judge to sign an order for a full forensic examination of Vanessa's phone. The technical team would retrieve deleted files and hidden apps to find the real source of the false messages. Vanessa's lawyer fought against it for a week, claiming it violated her privacy, but the judge sided with us. The phone company finally sent over the complete phone records, showing all the calls and texts from my number over the past year. Marcus spread them out on her conference table and highlighted the relevant dates with a yellow marker. There were no messages on Vanessa's number during any of the periods she claimed I had threatened her. Marcus said this was our first solid proof that Vanessa had been lying about the threats. She submitted it to the court that same afternoon, while I was sitting in her office eating biscuits and watching the news on the TV. The next morning, Nathaniel called Marcus's office with great news about Vanessa's phone. He had found a spoofing app hidden inside a calculator file that was installed at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the wedding. This was exactly when Vanessa locked herself in the bathroom after calling the police. The app had generated realistic screenshots of messages from any number she wanted. Nathaniel sent over the technical report detailing the installation date and app history. Marcus immediately passed everything to the prosecutor, who called back right on time. He told her that, given the growing evidence, he was becoming less inclined to file charges against me, but he would not officially close the investigation yet. This was standard procedure to protect himself from any legal ramifications. Marcus said it was just a cover, and not to worry, but I still couldn't sleep well. 3 days later, my phone exploded with notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. Someone had leaked details of the case online, including my name and photo on social media. The messages started off supportive, but quickly turned dark. Death threats flooded my voicemail in a matter of hours. People found my professional email and sent explicit descriptions of what they wanted to do to me. Someone posted the address of my friend's house, saying they were going to set it on fire. Marcus helped me take screenshots of everything and filed a complaint while we installed security cameras at my friend's house. The harassment escalated so much that I had to change my phone number twice in 1 week. My friend's kids were afraid to go to school because cars would slow down in front of the house and take pictures. Marcus hired a private security firm to patrol the neighborhood and escort us to court. The online mob had already decided I was guilty, without knowing any of the details of the case. 3 days later, I received a letter of apology, written in shaky handwriting. It was from Gregory, admitting he hadn't believed my son. He texted to say that he wasn't choosing a side, but that he needed to distance himself from the whole situation. Ethan's parents completely stopped responding to calls or messages, as if we no longer existed. The family had fractured, each member choosing their own way of dealing with their guilt. This week, the social worker showed up at my friend's house with documents about Lucas. They said he had to stay in a therapeutic care home, and that my friend's family was qualified because she had the right training. Lucas could stay where he felt safe while getting the help he needed for what had happened to him. The social worker brought toys and books to help him feel more comfortable. My friend's kids were kind to him and taught him how to play cards. 2 weeks later, Vanessa's lawyer filed a motion to have my son's photos removed as evidence. She argued that they had been obtained illegally and couldn't be used in court. The request meant that Lucas would have to testify about how he had gotten the photos. Marcus immediately began preparing counterarguments for why the evidence had to be preserved. The hearing was set for the following month, and everyone had to appear. During this time, Lucas had to attend a tribunal for minors for allegations of aggression. The judge reviewed all the evidence and offered Lucas a dejudicialization program instead of formal prosecution. He would have to undergo therapy twice a week and complete 60 hours of community service at an animal shelter. If he succeeded in everything, his record would remain unblemished. Lucas shook his head and signed the papers without saying a word. The army called me that same week for a meeting with the administrative council. They told me that the negative publicity surrounding the case had affected the morale of the unit and the security of the base. My security clearance was under review, and they questioned the legitimacy of my humanitarian leave. Why had Vanessa expected to be locked in the bathroom to install this fraudulent app? The timing was far too convenient, almost as if she already had a plan in place in case things went wrong at the wedding. I had to submit pages of documents detailing everything that had happened. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and my career was on the line. During the proceedings, the judge repeatedly asked Vanessa's lawyer to explain the technical issues surrounding the evidence from her phone. Aubrey had discovered discrepancies with the euros attached to the files and metadata that showed the files had been created after Vanessa went to the bathroom. The lawyer stumbled over his words, trying to make sense of the inconsistencies. The judge frowned and took notes, while Vanessa sat there looking increasingly nervous. Her bruises had faded, but she kept touching her face, as though the pain was still there. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge announced that he would issue his decision in 2 weeks. The child protection investigation concluded that Vanessa had indeed mistreated the 2 boys. They also found Ethan guilty of failing to protect his children from a known threat. He was ordered to attend parental education classes weekly for 6 months. The security plan was extended by another 6 months, with surprise home visits included. Ethan began attending the mandatory classes without complaint. He sat in the back, taking notes and asking questions about the signs of abuse that he had overlooked. His anger shifted from us to Vanessa as new evidence came to light. He started sending brief emails asking for updates on Lucas. One morning, I woke up to dozens of Facebook messages from accounts I didn't recognize. They were filled with hateful things about me and my son, but included details only Vanessa could have known. Victoria documented each message and traced the IP addresses back to Vanessa's building. We filed charges of harassment in court, claiming she had violated the no-contact order through her friends. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing to reconsider the restraining order. Vanessa hired a new lawyer who claimed she couldn't control what her friends did, but Victoria had proof that Vanessa was directly connected to the fake accounts. Meanwhile, Lucas began trauma therapy but refused to speak during the first 3 sessions. Instead, he spent his time drawing birds and trees, while the therapist waited patiently. During the 4th session, he finally uttered something about how he had always felt dirty. The therapist gave him a special soap to use whenever the feelings became overwhelming. Week by week, he said a few more words about what had happened. Sometimes, he would stop mid-sentence and return to drawing birds. The therapist reassured me that this was a normal part of the healing process and that it would take time. Lucas was making progress during his therapy, using dolls to act out the events. His therapist documented everything for the criminal case. My friend's family was amazing with him, and he even began smiling again. The military council reviewed all my documents, along with Victoria's testimony regarding the false accusations. They decided to extend my humanitarian leave but reassign me to administrative tasks. My security clearance remained intact, but it would be reevaluated in 6 months. Ethan's parents eventually sent an email saying they needed time to process everything. They admitted they should have listened when my son first spoke out. Gregory started sending texts again, asking if the boys needed anything. Gift cards for clothes and toys arrived, but he didn't have the courage to visit us. The family was slowly trying to figure out how to deal with the guilt. 3 days later, the school called to organize Lucas's return. We sat in a conference room with the principal, 2 counselors, and the special education coordinator. They kept using terms like trauma-informed approach and modified schedule while I filled out piles of paperwork. Lucas started with half days and gradually worked his way up to full-time over the course of 6 weeks. A counselor checked in with him every morning and afternoon. He had extra time for exams and could leave class if he felt overwhelmed. The principal assured me that everything would be kept confidential, but I knew how schools worked. By the time we left, I could already hear teachers whispering in the hallway. Later that afternoon, I checked my emails and saw that the promotion list had been published. I scrolled through, searching for my name among the 15 years of employees who had earned promotions. Mine was nowhere to be found. My commander had warned me that this would happen, but seeing it play out still made my chest tighten. All those deployments, all the perfect evaluations, gone, because of an incident that wasn't even my fault. I shut my laptop, trying to push aside thoughts of the retirement points I would never earn. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from Vanessa's family's lawyer. It was an obligatory confidentiality agreement, or we would owe $2 million in damages for defamation. The letter claimed we had ruined Vanessa's reputation with false accusations. I immediately called Case, the lawyer my friend had recommended, who had been helping us. She laughed when I read the letter to her. "They're scared," she said. "It's desperation." That afternoon, I met Case at a cafe. She came in with a stack of papers. She'd already pulled Vanessa's court records and the CPS reports. "We're not signing anything that silences these boys," she declared. I looked at the sections of their agreement, and she pointed to a clause. "Look at this. They want the boys to never speak about the abuse, even in therapy," she said, blocking out entire pages with a red pen. Over the next week, Case went back and forth with their lawyers. They offered us $50,000 to drop everything, then $100,000, then $200,000. Each time, Case responded the same way. "My clients want justice, not money." Their lawyer became more aggressive, threatening to drown us in legal fees. Case didn't flinch. "Try it. I work on abuse cases as a contingency," she added, sliding a counterproposal across the table. "No confidentiality agreement, no money exchange." The lawyer's face turned bright red, but he took the papers without another word. Meanwhile, the prosecutor called with an update on Vanessa's case. They offered her 18 months in prison if she pleaded guilty to the assault charges. I felt my stomach churn. It seemed impossible. She had sexually assaulted 2 children. The prosecutor sighed, looking exhausted. "Her lawyer is good. He claims the evidence is circumstantial," he explained. Vanessa's lawyer had filed motion after motion to dismiss the evidence. He was trying to get my son's photos excluded, claiming they had been obtained illegally. They even argued that Lucas's testimony had been coached. Every delusional tactic imaginable was being thrown our way. "We're looking at a trial in at least 8 months, the prosecutor continued. He explained that the courts had been delayed, and that we were now facing 8 months of waiting. Legal bills were piling up, and my son would have to relive all of this repeatedly. That night, around 11 p.m., my phone rang. It was her. I could hear her crying, in my dreams. I had to remind her to do the breathing exercises her therapist had taught her. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. We did the breathing exercises together for 10 minutes until her breathing became more even. Ethan called briefly. This has become a nightly routine now. He refuses to sleep in his own bed. The next morning, I called Lucas's therapist for an emergency session. She managed to get him in that afternoon. 3 weeks passed before the trial date for my son's case. The judge reviewed his therapy attendance records and his counselor's reports. My son had attended every session. The judge approved his dejudicialization program, with conditions. He was required to complete 100 hours of community service at an animal shelter, undergo therapy for a year, and attend monthly check-ins with a probation officer. He was also forbidden from having any contact with Vanessa or her family. My son lowered his head at every condition. The judge reminded him that this was his opportunity to avoid a permanent criminal record. We began the community service that weekend. Watching my son clean the animal cages and walk the dogs was hard. We will never truly know what he endured. But the animals seemed to love him immediately. The next morning, Kay's called with good news. She had filed a request to obtain Vanessa's past therapy records. Vanessa's family fought hard, citing privacy laws, but Kay's had found a precedent in cases of recurrent abuse. The judge sided with us. Vanessa's therapy files from Vermont would be sent. Kay's voice was filled with excitement. There could be other victims, she said. We would know in 2 weeks what those files contained. On the same day, I was called into my boss's office. There was an official reprimand waiting for me there. The reprimand cited unworthy conduct for the negative attention brought to the unit. It was the lightest punishment possible, but it still felt like a punch in the gut. My boss looked uncomfortable as I signed the paperwork. I fought for you, he said. It was the best I could do. The reprimand would remain in my file permanently. Any future review of my file would see it. My military career was effectively over, even though I could technically stay in the service. I left his office knowing I would never regain my rank. The following days blurred together with meetings with lawyers, therapy appointments, and school conferences. Every step forward felt like 2 steps backward, but we kept going because what other choice did we have? The boys needed some semblance of normalcy, as much as we could give them. Even if that normalcy now meant therapists, courtrooms, and nightmares that wouldn't stop. 3 weeks later, Ethan started therapy as part of his custody agreement with CPS. I received a copy of the report from my lawyer, detailing what Ethan had confessed to his therapist. He admitted in the session that he had noticed Vanessa getting too close to the boys months before the wedding. He had seen her touch my son's shoulder too long and sit too close to him during movie nights. The therapist documented everything and immediately sent it to social services, as required by his treatment plan. The following week, Vanessa's parents showed up at my lawyer's office, accompanied by their own lawyer and a check. They wanted to settle Lucas's civil complaint quietly, without filing anything with the court, which would make headlines. The settlement documents guaranteed that Lucas's therapy would be covered until he turned 21, with no session limits. Their lawyer had us sign papers stating that we could never discuss the money with anyone. The way Vanessa's lawyer clung to explanations about the phone evidence, while Vanessa sat there nervously touching her face, seemed like such a calculated act. I wondered if they had rehearsed this performance to gain sympathy from the judge during the hearing. My son returned to school with a safety plan that the counselor had helped us put together. The kids whispered when he walked down the hall, and some of them even moved away from him at lunch. We practiced breathing exercises in the car before school, but some mornings, he just sat there, shaking. I had to call in to say he was sick and we would try again the next day. The lawyer called me into his office to show me what they had found in Vanessa's sealed therapy files. 3 other children from her past had reported similar incidents, but those signals had been ignored by various therapists. She immediately withdrew the plea deal and said they would be adding charges for each of the previous victims. Marcus had me sit in her office with a cup of coffee, preparing me for what was to come. Vanessa's defense lawyer would attack everything about my military service and how I raised my son. We started doing mock sessions, with Marcus coaching me as if I were a witness. She made me answer the same questions over and over until I was able to stay calm, no matter what they threw at me. Meanwhile, social services kept receiving updates from Lucas's foster family. He was improving every week. He still needed therapy twice a week and was often plagued by nightmares, but they were determined to keep him. They even told the social worker they would adopt him if Ethan's parental rights were completely revoked. My son started his community service at a shelter for victims of domestic violence in the city. He helped sort donations and cleaned the playroom where children stayed while their mothers met with counselors. The coordinator said that working there seemed to help him realize that he wasn't alone in what had happened. Other children had been hurt too, and seeing them heal gave him hope that he could heal as well. I sat at my kitchen table after the boys went to bed, surrounded by piles of paper. Marcus's legal invoices had drained my savings, and the therapy schedules for both boys added to the mountain of bills. The calendar was filled with court dates, hearings, and CPS notes. The case was still dragging on for months, with depositions, hearings, and evaluations. But tonight, my son was sleeping in his bed at the end of the hallway, instead of being locked up in a juvenile detention center. Lucas was safe, surrounded by people who believed him and were protecting him, not stuck in a house where no one cared. For now, that had to be enough, because it was all we had while we waited for the system to do its job. Thank you for joining me today. It really does make you see things a little differently. See you next time. And if you made it to the end, leave a comment. I love reading all of them.